This is your host, James. I'm delighted to be speaking to Maureen Healy today. Today's author is, her website is growinghappykids.com, and she's wrote a wonderful book called The Energetic Keys to Indigo Kids, Your Guide to Raising and Resonating with the New Children. And let me tell you a little bit about Maureen before I bring her on. Maureen Healy is a leading voice for the children globally. With more than 15 years of experience, she has helped countless parents and children grow happier. Her first book, Growing Happy Kids, guided adults to nurture their children's inner confidence and reveal the 5 building blocks of confidence. Maureen's work has also garnered praise and popularity on her Psychology Today and PBS blogs, as well as appeared across all media outlets such as SiriusXM's Martha Stewart Living Radio and CW's San Diego Living Morning Show. What's unique about Maureen is her global mindset. In 2007, she lived at the base of the Himalayas, working with Tibetan refugee children and also studying with His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. Since then, Maureen has spoken about spirituality in children across denominations and spiritual centres in the US and Europe. Creative Visions Foundation and the Simha Foundation have both recognised her outstanding work. And into September 2013, Maureen's new book, The Energetic Keys to Indigo Kids, which we're reviewing today, hit the bookshelves, and it helps adults unlock the mystery of their highly sensitive yet stubborn children. And that rings a few truths to me. But without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi, Maureen. Welcome to Capricorn Radio.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Wow, it's a pleasure to have you here. I know we had a little mishap in trying to schedule the show, and that's fine. I mean, we're here today. I've been looking forward to this. I'm not entirely clued into the phenomena of indigo kids. I guess the biggest thing is to maybe define that. I guess I read a lot of your bio out there. Have you, what I didn't really allude to much is your involvement with indigo kids. You have quite a diverse background and all the multitude of things that you've done, but I guess define for us first indigo kids and how long you've been working in this field.
Sure. I've been working with children for the last 15, 20 years. And my specialty is highly sensitive children, and indigo children fall under that umbrella of highly sensitive, meaning they have very sensitive to, sensory input, sound, light, touch, feelings, and they're highly responsive and reactive in their nervous system. Indigo children have not only high sensitivity, but they hold a fierceness to them. So they are not only highly sensitive, but they're sensitive with very strong-willed nature, stubborn, people would say. So they hold both sensitivity and a fierceness. And if you have an indigo child, you would know it because, some of the things that they'd say in your house is, that is not fair. Or, oftentimes years ago, if your parents told you go to your room, you would just go to your room. Nowadays, the indigo children just say to their parents, I refuse. So it's that strong-willed, stubborn nature that teachers and parents and adults and grandparents, when they understand what that is and what their mindset is and how their energy works, you can just have more success and you can have more harmony and happiness.
Wow. Do we have a time frame when indigo kids are born? I know a lot of people talk about this as a time frame, and we're going through energetic changes in our galactic movement. People talk about crystal children and indigo children. The whole thing's a bit, convoluted for me, Maureen. Do you even concentrate on the whys and the wherefores? Are you more practically interested in the indigo kid phenomenon?
I'm really more practically interested in helping people understand who these kids are and how to help them. Because when these kids aren't assisted, their energy is so fast moving, it can go in a really skillful way or really not skillful. So they're prone to depression and anxiety and other things that have brought them into my office, which is why I said, okay, wait, I need to do something more here. But back to your question about when they were born. Anyone who says they absolutely know, we can't know for sure, but certainly they are coming in more quantity now. And they probably started around earlier last century. So people say there was an influx in the 70s as well. Mm-hmm. But I know people who are, 55, 60, 70 years old that have a lot of indigo energy. So there's certainly no definitive sort of line in the sand. But these kids today, especially like ADHD, which we would call, attention dialed to a higher dimension, their mind works very differently. Their energetic and nervous system work very differently. So when we don't understand them, we sort of diagnose them and put them into categories.
Wow, for sure. The funny thing is that dyslexia, ADHD, ADD, it's all on the rise, bipolar.
Right.
I do think perhaps maybe there's a reason with our suns giving off a lot of electromagnetic energy, that we are bioelectric beings on this planet and that we are being affected. I look at it in terms of an astrology point. Maybe do you think there's any particular astrology types sensitive to the indigo kid phenomena, or?
I think it's really across the board, because I know indigos who have gone into different fields, not just artists, but just, people who are creative in all fields, whether they're scientists or teachers or parents. I think more than anything, it has a lot, things sort of come to the surface quickly when we don't eat healthy foods, and we're really a product of what we put into ourselves. So that's a huge piece of the indigo puzzle, because they're not only emotionally sensitive, they're physically sensitive.
Wow. I guess then creativity is a big part of the indigo kids' personality.
Oh, they're extremely creative and extremely innovative. And if you have an indigo child and who is very sensitive and strong-willed, because they want to do things differently. They oftentimes want to do them their own way. And that oftentimes, at least in America, means, and probably other countries too, is that they don't necessarily fit into traditional school systems. So, when your child is different than the other kids, and not in a bad way, everyone's different, but they learn in a different way. They create and they read at a different time. They do things differently.
Wow. Sounds like you're talking about my biography here, Maureen.
Well, they're oftentimes very gifted in certain areas, but they're not gifted across the board. So there's certain one or two areas where they just shine. Like a spike,
on the graph in terms of talent.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's me for sure. It's like. And I think it's okay. I mean, people seem to concentrate on ADHD and problematic kids now, like it's a burdensome thing. And I've seen people with, my own brother has dyslexia too, and he's incredibly gifted, not in an academic sense, but he is gifted in business acumen or how he sees things. He sees things extremely different and visually active. He's visually more assertive than and astute in that respect, so it's just people have different talents in different ways. We've got different packages in every human on this planet. That's the way I like to see it.
And I would just say that, like you're saying, is just that anything, however you've been given these gifts because you're patterned for your purpose. That doesn't mean your purpose is going to be learned in elementary school. It just means that you're patterned for your purpose. Mm-hmm. So discovering your strengths and giving, children a chance to, try different things and learn where they sort of excel is important. And not judging it, not saying, sometimes I have parents that say, but I want my son or daughter to be a doctor. It's like, well, you didn't get a doctor, you got a guitar player or whatever it is. Really just, it's hard sometimes in practice to accept someone unconditionally.
Sure. You picked a very good point there, Maureen. I think there's a lot of that in our society today, whether we're talking America, Ireland, UK, everybody wants their kids to be something that either they are or, either your parents are doctors or, they want a doctor, or, somebody's a lawyer, says they want to, give their kids a better helping hand and they have a career waiting for them, but, we are who we are, and we're born incredibly diverse and different people. It's a shame that society's kind of gone that way. However, I think we're at incredibly changing times as well, and a lot of people are more aware of this indigo kid phenomena. I guess then, Maureen, just let's go to the book. The Energetic Keys to Indigo Kids, your guide to erasing and resonating with new children. Why write the book, Maureen? Do you feel there was a need for the book? Do you think the time was right for the book?
Well, what I did in the book, I have a very popular blog on Psychology Today, and you can find it through my website on growinghappykids.com. But I had so many hits, so many eyeballs on the article I wrote called The Highly Sensitive Child that I was getting a lot of referrals from it, and people were calling me and people seeing me in my office. But the mainstream parenting world and teaching world, really, they talk about, highly sensitive children. But there was a phenomenon that I still see that's beyond that, which is that sensitivity and that sort of strong-willed, fierce nature that is the indigo child. So there was nothing really written before about the indigo children that brought a psychological background to it. Most people were in the New Age mindset, which certainly this is a mind, body, spirit book, but it didn't bring sort of a mindset. So what I wrote differently in this book is really understanding their mindset, because when you understand their mindset, you see their triggers, you can understand what's really happening here. Because if you just look at behavior, you're like, oh, another meltdown, what am I going to do? But if you begin to see before that, why are they having their meltdown? How can I help them? Then everything changes, not only for you as parents and teachers, but for the children. They get to experience feeling validated and understood and appreciated, and things can go better for them.
Wow. I guess, like you touched on with the New Age, that's the only information I've ever learned about indigo kids from a New Age perspective. And it's like, I like what you've done, Maureen, because it's tangible and it's practical and it's addressing the present problem that indigo kids need to be taught in a different way, or encouraged in a different way, educated maybe in a more way that suits them and not societal structure. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I think Michael J. Spock said, if kids don't learn the way we teach them, we should teach the way they learn. And I think that's true. Wow,
for sure. Tell us about, how we define these sensitive children versus the indigo kids. I mean, because kids can be sensitive and kids can be normal kids and still maybe look like an indigo kid. How do we differentiate what is an indigo kid to a highly sensitive kid?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, I guess that what I would say is there's a big umbrella of children who are highly sensitive, and that means they're highly sensitive to sensory input. So the words kids say to them on the playground. For example, if there was someone who was teasing another kid, maybe one kid can shake it off, right? Another kid starts bawling their eyes out, or they're sensitive to smells, or they're sensitive to sounds. Oftentimes, highly sensitive children who are auditory learners, they're very sensitive to sounds, and they'll cry at loud sounds or images. These kids, oftentimes highly sensitive children, can't take in even some Disney movies, which are not violent to maybe some parents, but to kids, they see The Lion King and they're in tears. So highly sensitive kids are exactly what that implies, is highly sensitive. They're sensitive to their input. Things come into them, and that they go in deeper, and they respond very quickly. So they have a quick response system. Their nervous system is very quick to respond. So that big umbrella includes lots of children. That could be kids on the autism spectrum. That could be Asperger's. That could be what we would consider normal, healthy children, but that are just highly sensitive. Oftentimes, those are the artists, those are the innovators, those are the people who are doing very creative work, whatever field or subject or interest they have, but they're very creative. And what differentiates the indigo children is that they have that high sensitivity, but they have that fierceness that can get them in what many people would call trouble, Mm-hmm. They don't care if you're their parent or their principal. If they think you're wrong, they're going to say, hey, you are wrong. And that could, that could land you in detention or something.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever worked with anybody in the autistic spectrum then, Maureen?
I have worked with a few, but that's not my specialty.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the children who are on the spectrum, and at least in the U.S., I'm very familiar. I know other places as well, but it's so many children that they have a high degree of sensitivity.
I have decreased latent inhibition myself, Maureen, and I try to explain what it is to people. I do have extremely sensitive touch to my head. I actually go to my barbers to get my hair cut, and it freaks me out because I don't like people touching my hair or my head. But I know that I take information in a different way, and I used to work in the Autistic Trust and take the kids out to museums and stuff a few years ago. I quite enjoyed that too, but yeah, it is quite a different approach to the autistic spectrum. But they would be considered to be in the indigo phenomena in some way.
Well, I'm not sure if they could be indigos, but they would really probably be a category of their own. And I guess I would say is that these children are sensitive, right? It's oftentimes autistic kids aren't unhappy. They're just in their own world. So, that's a different story.
Sure. So indigos, they're highly sensitive, but they're more than that.
They're fierce. They're stubborn. They want life to be honest and fair, and they want to be treated equally, and they'll get angry, not upset, angry. Yeah. And that's where they need to channel that energy, because it can come out really in a direction that doesn't help them. So if you recognize this, Maureen, this stubbornness and this defiant energy, that you would be able to guide that away from the anger and to something more productive, creative, and channel it in a way. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I'd say, I would say channeling the energy. So, you're not going to, have a magic wand and make this fierce, angry energy go away, but you're going to learn how to use it. For example, like Michael Phelps has ADHD, and his parents saw this intensity to him. And thankfully, early on, they put him in a pool, and they go, oh, wow, this really works for him. So it's figuring out a way to connect your child with either something they love or a way to, it could be exercise, it could be reading, it could be, it could be a whole lot of different things, but it's helping them learn how to channel their energy in ways that are healthy and productive. Yeah, that's huge. So are Indigo kids recognizably spiritual? Are they spiritual, and is it a recognizable quality in them? Well, the word indigo is correlated to the third eye chakra. The color of that chakra is indigo. And the idea is that that's your center of intuition. So they tend to be very perceptive, sensitive, oftentimes psychic. And, it's not necessarily across the board. They believe in God, or they believe in, everyone's different. But certainly the indigos in generally tend to be very intuitive, very into, like Harry Potter and magic. And they like to think of metaphysical topics. And many of them have had otherworldly experiences when they were very young. Mm-hmm. Wow. I know from your bio as well, I didn't read out, but you are a Reiki master as well, Maureen. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about being a Reiki master? Sure. There's certain levels of learning Reiki with energy healing, which is hands-on healing technique. It's a Japanese technique. And I have found that indigos and sensitive children in general respond really well to alternative therapy, whether it's crystals or sound healing or acupuncture or energy healing, such as Reiki. And Reiki healing, I have taught children Reiki so that they can give it to themselves, because when you're able to, we're here on planet Earth, right? One of the reasons is to be a master of our vibration. So if we can learn how to change our energy field, then we can learn how to, really progress in this world. And children that feel anxious, whether they're having a test coming up or they can't sleep or they have a headache, kids that learn that hands-on healing with their own hands and get activated to do that, it's one way that they can bolster their confidence and feel more empowered and feel more in control of their life versus feeling like, oh, these emotions are just coming at me. You want children to know that they have a choice and that they have power and that they're leading edge creators. They may be little and they still have things to learn, but that they have that ability to, create their lives. So long story short, energy healing is an old tradition. It's something that you can go to school for. It's not expensive, but it does have, I found that a lot of sensitive children not only respond well to go to an energy healing session, but that they can learn that themselves, and they really love it. Wow. Well, you answered my next question, which is, can you apply Reiki to indigo kids? But I guess is it remarkable results, or is it just a softer way of helping or alleviating some stress in them? That's a really good question. I mean, it's sort of like any teacher, quite honestly. If you go to the Dalai Lama, it's going to be different than you go to someone else on the corner, maybe, perhaps. So if you have an extraordinary energy healing teacher, you can have an extraordinary experience. If you have a good one, you'll have a good one. But in general, energy healing is a complementary treatment. So if your arm is pulled off, go to the regular hospital, get that fixed. But if you have stress or an anxiety, or there's something else that you're thinking, why aren't these headaches going away? Or it can be a really effective complementary treatment. Wow. You mentioned the Dalai Lama there. I got to ask you about this as well. I mean, tell us about your adventures, if you permit me to say that, with the Dalai Lama. It must have been a sense of adventure being there in that location and philosophizing and learning with him. Yeah, it was really funny because I was working at the time in a clinic in New York City, in greater New York, and it was low income, and I was seeing children in all sorts of different cases, but it was working in clinical psychology where at the time they focused a lot on, okay, what's wrong with this kid? And I really wanted to go to a culture that focused on what's right with these children. And Tibetan Buddhism, they look at these children as having been reincarnated, and that there's these beautiful spiritual children, and their job is to, be their guides. And when they take a child home from the hospital, the first thing they take them to is the altar in their house, because they know that's going to be the most important place for that child in this lifetime, is to have some sort of spiritual practice. So, going there, working with the Tibetan refugee children, having studied with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, it's extraordinary experiences. And it's sort of one of those things where if you make a wish, it certainly can come true. When I called the airline, I said, all right, well, do I have enough frequent flyer miles? They said, you have more than enough to go for free. So it was one of those things where just everything came together, and it was an extraordinary experience. I loved being there, and I had a hard time coming back, truth be told.
Wow, I bet you did. He's the same star sign as myself. I love the Dalai Lama. What an interesting guy. And
right?
I loved the movies that were done, and I think Kundun and another one about the story of the Dalai Lama and reincarnation and how the whole thing happens. I think it's an incredibly interesting scenario. But yeah.
It's amazing, actually. And there's people now who are studying, children who remember their past lives. And often these are indigo or psychic, sensitive kids. And they're amazing stories.
Oh, for sure. So you have an article, Maureen, I want to mention as well. 3 keys to indigo kids' success. You talk about partnership, you talk about outlets, and you talk about mentors. Could you tell us a little bit about that article?
Sure. Outlets, partners, and mentors. Is that what I said?
Yeah. Partnership, outlets, and mentors. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, partnership. The big part of that is the big piece of partnership is that these children don't respond to the authoritarian, teaching or parenting style, which says, "Hey, you got to do this because I said so." That's just never going to work. So partnering with them is essential. Helping, working with them and saying, okay, I need you to help me with this big cause, and explaining, or saying, giving them choices and negotiating with them and helping them become part of something and understand why, versus just, like, for example, a lot of indigo kids hate standing in line at a store. They just hate it. They're impatient, and they're used to this other place that goes beyond time where things can happen instantly, and standing in line is just painful to them. So you have to say, hey, this is what you do on planet Earth. We stand in line. If we want to get pizza for dinner, this is what we do. So sometimes they just need a little guidance and hand-holding on things, and that partnership really works, partnering with them. And it's it will make all the difference in the world. And you just try it, right? Instead of saying, take out the garbage, saying, it would be great if you took out the garbage for me. You can get 10 more minutes of screen time tonight, or whatever it is. And they'll say, oh, I'm on. I'll get it every night, So working with them. And they're very inwardly motivated. So you want to really, spark that inner motivation, what works, like screen time or something that's really important to them. Outlets we sort of talked about, but making sure that children, since they have such intense and fast-moving energy, that they are able to let it go in productive and positive ways every day. It could be jumping on a trampoline in the backyard. It could be walking the dog. It could be being on a soccer team. It could be helping you cook the nightly dinner. There's lots of outlets, but they need to have one where they really immerse themselves and really feel, I would ideally get one that they could build their confidence in, but, something that lets them let go of their energy. And the other piece is really mentors. Mentors, especially for highly sensitive children, one of the common scenarios I see is that, one parent really gets the kid and the other parent thinks like, oh my gosh, there's a Martian who dropped them off. Like, who is this child? So, whether it's mentoring in the family system or outside of the family, I actually have a distance mentoring program where I work with indigos and sensitive kids via Skype. But whatever, you need to get a mentor for children so that they learn from someone with a similar nature who can help them be successful. Because as we all know, if we're sensitive, that it's not always easy. There are this world is sometimes insensitive. It sometimes is, challenging. You have to learn how to navigate it and how to balance your intuition with reason, and how to, oftentimes sensitive children and indigos in particular are very impulsive. So you need to sort of build logic into the equation and help them with life skills. So when they have a mentor that can help them with that, it's really positive, and it can be really rewarding for their life.
Of course, we're focusing here a little, Maureen, on an indigo kid, and any kid, whether it's indigo or not, needs to be raised, needs to be educated, nurtured in its own particular way. And we're talking about a kid coming to fruition in all its talents and that respect. And however, maybe these indigo kids are born here on planet Earth to teach us something, us the humans, us the adults, and that in maybe how to be free.
Yeah, I mean, Indigo Children, one of their collective missions are that they prize honesty almost above all else. So they're here to break down, and they're very fierce with their energy. So they're here to break down systems that don't work anymore and create ones that do. And whether it's in healthcare or education or whatever society and culture they're born into or they live in. But the thing that makes it challenging is they're leaders. So oftentimes as a parent, it's hard to raise a leader, because they'll tell you, they'll negotiate, and they'll say, hey, they have 10 reasons for why they can't do something, and you want them to do that one thing. So they are extraordinarily gifted, and they are leaders. It doesn't mean that they're perfect at everything, and it doesn't mean they know everything, but they certainly have an inner wisdom and an intuitive nature that they trust. And they are here to help really take the world to a new level.
Wow, for sure. Forgive me for this, Maureen. I kind of, the statistical and engineering scientific brain comes out sometimes. I have a very much an alternative viewpoint on the world too. So are we saying like indigo kids have like really high IQs, and that they're different, remarkably and noticeably different in terms of IQ to a normal kid?
Well, it's a very question. I don't necessarily believe in standard IQ measurements.
Sure. Because
they're measuring in a particular way. And I think if we had a true, accurate, authentic, intelligent measurement, we would be able to assess children, where their intelligences lie. More like Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. There are children who are going to be off the board athletic, right? But they're not going to be, scholarly kids. Or there's going to be someone who's their science knowledge, like in the U.S., there was a kid who did a breakthrough for cancer by 16. They're off the board in science, but maybe they're not good in reading. They're going to have particular skills that'll be gifted and off the board. But I would say it's unlikely they're off the board, across the map. It's really their particular gifts lie in certain areas, and they could be good students, don't get me wrong, but they really need to sort of learn life skills because of their sensitivity versus merely just going to school and just, going through. I mean, I'm a believer in education, but I mean, they need life skills that aren't always taught in schools. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Are we talking about a high percentage in any type of demographic, whether we're talking the United States or any country in the world? Do they have a higher percentage of indigo kids than anybody else for any particular reason, or is this across the board randomly balanced?
My experience is that it's been across the board. But, one of the reasons why I wrote the book, The Energetic Keys to Indigo Kids, is because more and more of these kids were coming into my office, and more people weren't really getting them. So I was not necessarily dealing with them on a preventative way. I was dealing with them reactive, like they were bullied, or, they failed school, or their parents were at wit's end and really didn't know what was happening. So I'm just seeing situations where parents want to help their children thrive and flourish, but just don't know how.
Wow. Okay, so you talk about common triggers as well, which is great. Tell us a little bit about this, Maureen, and how we can handle triggers and treat them.
Well, it sounds, it's really like anything that when you're aware of them, you can handle it differently. But I will say that their triggers, like I mentioned before, they prize honesty above all else. So if they think that you're being dishonest, even a perception of dishonesty would be a meltdown. So I had a client who has 2 girls, and one of the younger girls just thought her mother gave the other daughter more Cheerios in the bowl than she got. So she was so upset. But it was her perception, whether it was true or not. She perceived her mother was being dishonest and unfair. So oftentimes we have to help them sort of manage their way, because we know on the earth plane that things aren't always fair. So we have to help them with that. Some other triggers are they need creativity, so routine work sort of bums them out. They really need to be felt equal to others. So if there's a lot of hierarchy or people who really look down or talk down to them, that's a huge trigger, and that would set them off. They're certainly deeply feeling like other highly sensitive children. So if you used harsh words to them, like even if you spoke in a tone and what you thought wasn't bad per se, but you spoke in such a harsh tone, that could upset them. They certainly want their sensitivities honored. So if you call them things, whether it's hypersensitive or, whatever, things like that can really trigger them. They certainly want respect. So if someone's teasing them, but, I really think it's the honesty and the partnering with them and honoring their creativity and giving them respect and seeking to understand them, because they have a very unique mindset. Mm-hmm. And I go about that in much more detail in the book, but certainly, they're intense, their energy, right? It's very fast moving. They're very intelligent. They have sharpened intuition. They know when someone's lying to them. They're incredibly creative and innovative. And they're inwardly motivated. So if you are like, hey, I need you to go do this because you're going to get in trouble when, grandpa comes home, that mm-hmm. wouldn't necessarily motivate them. So you really have to work with them to succeed. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Just on the astrology thing again, and I know you're a water sign, Maureen, I won't say which one, but I know we spoke about this the last time, and I know from a water sign, I'm a Cancer myself, I know that I instinctually have this emotional intelligence that I know when people are lying to me, I just have to wait for it to be proved, or that, I also have a different way of processing information. Cancers are incredibly intuitive, which is why I asked, do you think that, certain signs would be prone to being indigo kids? And there is an incarnation thing as well to astrology in terms of a philosophy. Maybe indigo kids that are certain signs would be more enhanced in certain ways. But they say
that's absolutely true. Certainly, indigo children are in every sign, but they would demonstrate and animate themselves differently. And water signs, being very feeling and emotional, would be super sensitive, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And psychic in a way. They say the psychic signs of Pisces, Cancer, and Scorpio, and their intuition is remarkable in a different mm-hmm. way. So that's why I asked that. Mm-hmm. Mm. Okay, in chapter 2, you talk about the old way of parenting and that it doesn't work anymore, and that these kids need something different. They need a new methodology. Tell us about this new methodology of raising kids and why it's better, how it works and why it's better.
Well, yeah, I think at the basis really is the idea that children today, in the quote unquote olden days when I was little, my parents said, go to the room, I'd go to my room. Or if I got in trouble, I had a wooden paddle. But most places don't, spank kids anymore. So there's a certain level of respect and awareness and sort of evolved in our consciousness regarding children. And also a lot of indigos are no parents. So there's a different way of parenting them, a way that isn't more authoritarian, which is like, you just do this because I said so. It's more about involvement, whether you have a family meeting or whether you have a chart where they get stars or rewards that you agree upon if they do certain things around the house or the home. You want to give them choices. You want to negotiate with them. You want to get their buy-in. Of course, there's times where you have to say, listen, you got to brush your teeth because that's the way it is. Certain things are non-negotiable. I'm not saying negotiate everything. You certainly want to command respect from them. And you want to have an honest relationship because, like we mentioned, they know if you're not being honest. And that includes that I'm not saying necessarily tell them about the mortgage or something that's not child appropriate. But if you're really upset, what you can say is like, hey, mom or dad, I need 15 minutes and then we can talk, or we can play, or I can help you with your homework. Being honest about how you feel and what's going on in the world, and it gives them permission to be honest about their lives, and it continues to create a bond. I know, at least in the U.S., fast forward 10, 15 years, your kid is about to get into a car and someone's been drinking. You want them to have the courage in that moment to say, hey, I'm not getting in the car, and call you and say, hey, can you pick me up? And that takes a lot of strength. Mm-hmm. And you want to have that honest and open relationship with them. And if you don't have that, it's not optimum. That's basically it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I drew a parallel to astrology signs of Pisces, Cancer, and Scorpio, and that emotional intelligence and that instinctive nature to know whether somebody's lying or not. And my mum is a Pisces. She has this incredible quality to instinctually know a situation against the odds of statistically knowing it. However, stepping aside from astrology now, but in the same idea, this emotional intelligence and instinctual, do you think that Indigo kids have a high emotional intelligence very, very early on, as well as like academic and creativity? Is it up there as well, emotional intelligence?
I think that they have what I would call intuitive intelligence. Mm-hmm. So they have what I would say is an inner knowing, a wisdom, and they trust it. And that's part of the reason, which we could call, I guess in one way it's really emotional intelligence, but it's sort of taken to a different level when you say it's intuitive. You're saying that they, like when they know something is wrong, like if a principal is mean to them, they know that's not cool. They know it. They're not wondering. They know that's not okay, Gotcha. Or if someone's being bullied, whether they do something or they don't, they know that's not okay. Mm. So I think that they have the capability to either have the capacity for developing a really strong emotional intelligence. I think that we all come in with emotional intelligence. I think we all come in knowing what well-being feels like and knowing what it doesn't. Mm-hmm. And we sort of are naturally drawn to feeling good. Mm-hmm. And that we know when people are, really not being good to us, that's not okay. Mm-hmm. But I think sometimes kids get programmed that often not to trust their feelings and not to trust their intuition. Wow. And I think one of the highest octaves of parenting and teaching is really to teach children that, yes, you need to trust your feelings. Yes, you need to trust your intuition. And then, of course, as they grow and develop, you balance it with reason, but that they need to not get drummed out of trusting themselves.
And I think this incredibly important point that you made, Maureen, is that Indigo kids would trust their instincts. They trust themselves and their abilities because they see it and know it and feel it. And they have this trust with themselves. It's the rest of the world that doesn't understand them, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay, so in the book you talk about channeling energy, Maureen. Tell us the importance of this, what happens if they don't channel it? If these kids don't channel energy, what do we see?
Well, I mean, the reality is their energy is highly intense and it's fierce. So that's where it's the kind of energy that like a Marianne Williamson, a Gandhi, or even people less well known, but you have an intensity to you. And that intensity can be used for anything. So it can be used to play the violin. It can be used to become a master at the piano. It can be, it can be used to write a book. It can be used to win a science fair. It can be used to win the scoring, the goal that wins the soccer game. So the point is you can use it for good, but if it just stays in the body and doesn't get channeled out, it comes out sideways as, quick to respond to you, maybe saying not nice words, making a hole in the wall, hitting someone. It can be, if it's not channeled, it comes out sideways. So you really want to connect a child to channels of energy, whether it's learning karate or reading or whatever their interests are. And, also being open to those interests changing, right? So if they start with karate and they decide a year and a half later, I don't want to do this anymore, giving them a break and saying, okay, we do something different. Not being like, really forcing them to do something, because the forcing really just doesn't work with them.
What about careers, Maureen? Should you I mean, if there was any gifted child, whether they're indigo or not, maybe high IQ, maybe a genius child, or, an incredibly expressive and creative child, obviously parents are going to be thinking, wow, this is going to be such a great ability that these kids have, and you're going to obviously think about what this kid's going to do in later life, and you're going to think about careers. I mean, if anybody was gifted and you put them into a gifted school for children, you're obviously thinking 10 years down the line, when this kid's an adult, it's going to be, you're going to be setting things up now for that. So should parents of indigo kids be thinking of careers?
To be honest with you, I really think that my opinion, and I think that you need to teach a kid how to think and not what to think. So I think you need to help them make smart choices, help them get a good character, help them have some sort of grounding in ethics and morality, and help them develop their skills. And with some self-esteem and confidence, they'll figure it out. I mean, of course you can lead them and guide them. And if your child has a natural ability with science, maybe you point them in that way. Or if they have a natural ability with music, you point them in that way. Or they have a natural ability with engineering, you point them in that way. Mm-hmm. But you don't, set your child up so much so that they're boxed in and they don't have a way out. You trust them that they're intelligent, smart beings. And they certainly need your guidance. They're your children. But to give them the confidence that you believe in them is so important, because the reality of life is that we fail, we have disappointments. But if you can survive a disappointment, then nothing can beat you. You're unbeatable. And I think that that's a huge piece of the puzzle. And that's why I wrote my first book, Growing Happy Kids, because that talks about how to develop that inner resilience, that inner confidence in children that can lead to a deeper type of happiness. Because life isn't always rainbows and unicorns, as much as we would like to believe it is. But, there are moments in even a child's life that are challenging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Tell me about the Psychology Today blog, how you got involved with that, Maureen, because that's been quite successful for you.
How I got involved is they called me one day when I lived in Asheville, North Carolina, and said, would you blog for us? And I said yes, and I hung up the phone, and I called my sister, and I said, what is this blogging?
What is this blogging all about? Wow.
Because it was early. It was like 2008 or something. So I just blogging was starting to get bigger,
Yeah.
And as an author, I love to write. That's what I love to speak. I love to write. This is, those are some of the things I adore doing. So the idea of someone giving me a platform and a space to do that for a larger audience was helpful. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Do you feel you learned from the blog as well as helping people out and giving knowledge out?
Did I learn from the blog? I was, you're able to track what you write. So, I'm certainly aware of what certain things have hit a chord with the world.
Gotcha.
And I know that highly sensitive children and psychic kids, but particularly highly sensitive children, really hits a chord that across the world that this is a phenomenon occurring, and that more and more people are emailing me. And, it's just, it sort of allows me to put a finger on the pulse of the world and say, oh, wow, this is extraordinary. I've worked with people in Australia, in Europe, in Spain, in Portugal, in England, in Ireland, in the U.S. I mean, it's not something that I would say, oh, yeah, this is happening in a mountain in Nepal and only there. This is something going on everywhere. Mm-hmm. So it's really, asking the big and the right questions. How do we help? How can we be of service to these children versus having to fit these children into these pre-made models and making sort of putting them in and trying to squeeze them into the model? How can we really help them thrive?
Wow, beautiful. You talk about the Indigo success model in the book. Tell us about this. Give us a breakdown of what the Indigo success model is and how important it is.
Well, I mean, I think at the very heart of the idea is that Indigo children they tend to be right-brained. Certainly some of them are left-brained, and certainly they can be a balance between right and left. But they have a high level of creativity, a high level of innovativeness, and they need to balance that with logic and life skills. So the Indigo success model is something I drew up, and it's really the idea of balancing feeling and thinking, balancing the social skills and the solitude. A lot of parents with Indigo children really have come to me and said, my kid doesn't want to go to birthday parties, or my kid wants to play alone. So they have to learn how to have that balance between what feels right to them as far as solitude and what feels right as far as social and cooperation. Because as we all know, in order to do anything in this world, you need to cooperate and participate with others. That doesn't mean your career doesn't, you could have a career where you spend a lot of time by yourself, but you certainly need to work with others well. But children need pretty early on to learn those social, emotional, mental, spiritual, psychic skills and balancing that feeling and thinking. Oftentimes, if you just come from a feeling place, you're very impulsive. So, balancing with logic and reason, and also balancing, intuition with life skills. We catch a vision of our life, and then we can move it forward. There's a great quote by Michael Bernard Beckwith. He says, you're either pushed by pain or pulled by a vision. Mm-hmm. And I believe it's very true. So you want to be pulled by a vision, which is your intuition, but you want to put a solid foundation under it, which is those life skills. Mm-hmm. And we also want to balance the creativity and the sensitivity with, purpose and passion and strength. In other words, you want to balance your inner life with your outer life. So those are a lot of words to explain, but that's just sort of a taste of the idea that, indigo children are highly capable, intelligent, able children, and the idea is that they just need guidance and they need people to believe in them and to help them on their way and develop these skills of mental, emotional, social, spiritual, intelligences so they can move forward with more confidence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How important then is it in diet and nutrition to somebody who's an indigo kid?
Oh my gosh. Sometimes it's everything. I mean, it's huge. It's huge. Because we really are what we put into ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I can just tell you from my own experience, having worked with a lot of sensitive children, that, when they change their diet, their behavior changes. We have a biological base of behavior. So certain kids, we're talking at 1.5, which, at least in the U.S. we call the terrible twos. We think, oh, this is normal. But when you change their behavior, it's easier for them. Their speech is interlaid. Things really work better. So I believe that diet is a huge component to healthy development.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Is it maybe a personal question, Maureen, but are you a mum yourself? Do you find working with kids helps you philosophize with your own kids in this way?
I certainly think working with kids helps me with the children in my family. I think that, it's fun to work with kids of all different ages because you're tapped into those ages. Like 9 is so different than 6, and 6 is so different from 4, and 3.5 is so different from 4. So sure. There's particular strengths and challenges of each age group, and they're really fun. And things change so quickly with children, right? What's hot this week isn't hot next. So as an author, it's just so much fun, and you probably know this as well. Seeing the world through the eyes of children is, that's amazing.
Yeah. Wow, for sure. You talk about crystals and how that can help with an indigo kid. Are we talking, specific type of crystals for a specific type of indigo kids, like a whole genre of crystals being used, or any particular type of crystals, or are we talking auras and crystals being worked together?
I'm a very practical person. Mm-hmm. And, part of the things that I've seen succeed in the world, not only do we use crystals in our computers, but we use crystals in so many things. And, children, sensitive children in general, they oftentimes like crystals. So, I remember once one of the parents told me, they said, oh, my kids, they hate crystals, right? So then I got the child into the office alone. He goes, oh, I love crystals. So, crystals are something natural to children. Oftentimes they just really enjoy them. And my experience, having been trained in crystals by different people, is that there are certain crystals that if you hold them in your hand, that they calm you. And from my perspective, when you have a child who is very sensitive to energy, or who has a problem with anxiety or depression or different things, it's something to try. Whether it's a selenite ball that you put in your hand, or whether you use selenite in every corner and grid a room for it to be calm. I think there's a lot of practical ways that we can use crystals to help children reduce their anxiety, to increase their well-being, to help them feel grounded, to give them a protection. Mm-hmm. There's certainly, I use microcrystals that were developed for the Apollo 13 mission, actually, wow, that I use for some of my work. So there's really advanced technology regarding crystals, and maybe not all of it is out in mainstream knowledge, but being able to use crystals in a therapeutic way is is really the language of a lot of these sensitive and indigo children. They get it. You don't have to convince them. You know, they're like, oh yeah, let's give it a try. I mean, it certainly can't hurt.
Wow, for sure. So, Maureen, we're obviously talking about interacting with indigo kids here, and from an educational perspective, a healing perspective, channeling and helping function better. Is solitude for a good thing at any time for an indigo kid? Space.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the idea is, you know, we want to raise our children to learn how to think and how to behave in the world. And there are times and there are moments in everyone's life, whether you're a child or an adult, where you're like, you know what, I'd like some 15 minutes and I'd like to be by myself. Or, you know what, today, instead of playing with the neighbor, I want to just do Legos in my room. And I don't want any judgment about that. I want that ability to play and be free and enjoy. So the idea of, you know, letting children develop their own sense of peace and their own sense of, you know, creativity, I think that certainly can happen alone. And then there are other times where, you know, you encourage them to make a best friend, or join a sports team, or whatever sort of is part of their nature. But there needs to be a balance. But certainly children who are very sensitive, oftentimes they want to have some time alone, whether it's to draw or to play or to read, and that's very healthy.
Wow. How's the book been received so far, Maureen?
Oh, it's been doing great. It's been doing great. You know, it's so interesting because my book, Growing Happy Kids, the biggest response I got was, oh, forget the kids, this book is for me, which is so funny.
Wow.
But the Energetic Keys to Indigo Kids, the biggest response I've gotten so far was like, oh my God, thank you. I never thought about my child this way. And that's so interesting to me because, you know, as an author, I love to read, right? I'm incessantly reading. So the idea, I know that a book can really sort of spark something in someone. So the idea of it being able to be both practical and insightful on how these, you know, not just labeling these children as difficult and defiant and challenging, but really learning who they are and seeing the goodness in them is really helpful.
Wow. So you do workshops, Maureen? Do you do personal tuition and stuff like that, obviously?
Yeah, I do consultations and I do that distance mentoring program, and I do travel around quite a bit to do talks, so that's also a lot of fun.
Well, we're coming up to the end of the show. If you have any conferences, now is the time to roll it out in the last 5 minutes. So if you have any conferences, please tell us.
Well, I mean, the only thing I would say is, you know, my website is growinghappykids.com.
Yep.
And I have a distance mentoring program where I work with actual children. The children usually are you know, elementary school, so kindergarten through 8th grade. I know it might be a different system there, so like 7 years old to 12 or 13. And I work with them to gain the life skills so that they can succeed and thrive, which is so much fun.
Of course, we're concentrating on the indigo kids here, but the parents are obviously closely involved too. Do parents of indigo kids need to be as energetic as the indigo kid themselves? Because a lot of parents, sometimes aren't as energetic as their kids, and they get frustrated.
Well, I mean, I think more than anything, you know, they just, any adult, whether it's a parent or a teacher, that when you sort of understand a child and you frame who they are in a positive way, and you can develop a little bit of patience, you know, things can go really well. I think that, you know, we're all really busy, right? And it's frustrating, right? And when you don't understand someone, like, why are you behaving this way? Or why did you say that? You know, it's very difficult and it can be upsetting. So being able to step back, whether it's listening to a book or reading a book or getting some guidance or advice, you know, those kind of things you can get practical tools to help you in the here and now. I think that's important. But they're not always as energetic. I mean, just the nature of time in life, you know, sort of wanes, different energy comes and goes.
For sure. So indigo kids, Maureen, how do they network with other kids? How do they, you know, integrate with other kids who aren't?
That's a really great question. I think like in anything in life, I mean, certainly there could be a organized network, but in anything in life, it's really, you know, you go into your interests, whether it's ceramics or soccer or whatever it is, and you find kids that are like-minded. And that when you have a child that is very sensitive and you find a friend that is another sensitive, you make sure they have play dates. And they really, every child needs at least one friend, a really good friend. But But sensitive kids really need a friend because, they need someone to experience life as a sensitive person with. So, it sort of normalizes their experience when they have another friend, whether they're indigo or they're just sensitive in general. It helps them. And I think the best way to do it is through hobbies.
Mm-hmm. Hobbies, for sure. Maureen, we're at the end of the show. I guess the last question then, I guess, is, what do you want people to take away from this book? I presume awareness, number one.
Yeah, I guess, there's different books on the market that have been done really well, and they've framed these children as very challenging. And I'm not saying it's not challenging, but if we can frame them in a positive light and come to them from a place of wisdom, I think that we really can help them thrive. So for people to come away with some practical knowledge of who these children are and how can we help them, whether it's a classroom, a home, a community, a school, I think that's a really valuable thing. And I think that, just there's more and more and more children who have that high sensitivity and that fierceness. And if we can help them channel it into positive directions, our whole world changes. So from my standpoint, it's really, putting something, rock in the water and hoping there's a positive ripple effect.
Wow, for sure, Maureen. I do think you have a very unique selling point on the knowledge of indigo kids, and that you are providing a practical knowledge where other people concentrate on a new age philosophy of it. But definitely you can see in the book there's a practical knowledge and understanding. Of course, people can follow you on Twitter at MD Healy as well. Maureen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Very interesting lady, magnetic energy, that we are bioelectric beings on this planet and that we are being affected. I look at it in the terms of an astrology point. Maybe do you think there's any particular astrology types sensitive to the indigo kid phenomena, or?
I think it's really across the board, because I know indigos who have gone into different fields, not just artists, but just, people who are creative in all fields, whether they're scientists or teachers or parents. I think more than anything, it has a lot, things sort of come to the surface quickly when we don't eat healthy foods, and we're really a product of what we put into ourselves. So that's a huge piece of the indigo puzzle, because they're not only emotionally sensitive, they're physically sensitive.
Wow. I guess then creativity is a big part of the indigo kids' character, personality.
Oh, they're extremely creative and extremely innovative. And that's, if you have an indigo child and who is very sensitive and strong-willed, because they want to do things differently. They oftentimes want to do them their own way. And that oftentimes, at least in America, means, and probably other countries too, is that they don't necessarily fit into traditional school systems. So, when your child is different than the other kids, and not in a bad way, everyone's different, but they learn in a different way.
To Indigo Kids, which we're reviewing today, hit the bookshelves, and it helps adults unlock the mystery of their highly sensitive yet stubborn children. And that rings a few truths to me. But without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi, Maureen. Welcome to Capricorn Radio.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Wow, it's a pleasure to have you here. I know we had a little mishap in trying to schedule the show, and that's fine. We're here today. I've been looking forward to this. I'm not entirely clued into the phenomena of indigo kids. I guess the biggest thing is to maybe define that. I guess I read a lot of your bio out there. What I didn't really allude to much is your involvement with indigo kids. You have quite a diverse background and all the multitude of things that you've done, but I guess define for us first indigo kids and how long you've been working in this field.
Sure. I've been working with children for the last 15, 20 years. And my specialty is highly sensitive children, and indigo children fall under that umbrella of highly sensitive, meaning they have very sensitive to, sensory input, sound, light, touch, feelings, and they're highly responsive and reactive in their nervous system. Indigo children have not only high sensitivity, but they hold a fierceness to them. So they are not only highly sensitive, but they're sensitive with very strong-willed nature, stubborn, people would say. So they hold both sensitivity and a fierceness. And if you have an indigo child, you would know it because, some of the things that they'd say in your house is, that is not fair. Or, oftentimes years ago, if your parents told you go to your room, you would just go to your room. Nowadays, the Indigo children just say to their parents, I refuse. So it's that strong-willed, stubborn nature that teachers and parents and adults and grandparents, when they understand what that is and what their mindset is and how their energy works, you can just have more success and you can have more harmony and happiness.
Wow. Do we have a time frame when Indigo kids are born? I know a lot of people talk about this as a time frame, and we're going through energetic, changes in our galactic movement. People talk about crystal children and indigo children. The whole thing's a bit, convoluted for me, Maureen. Do you even concentrate on the whys and the wherefores? Are you more practically interested in the indigo kid phenomenon?
I'm really more practically interested in how.
This is your host, James. I'm delighted to be speaking to Maureen Healy today. Today's author is, her website is growinghappykids.com, and she's wrote a wonderful book called The Energetic Keys to Indigo Kids, Your Guide to Raising and Resonating with the New Children. And let me tell you a little bit about Maureen before I bring her on. Maureen Healy is a leading voice for the children globally. With more than 15 years of experience, she has helped countless parents and children grow happier. Her first book, Growing Happy Kids, guided adults to nurture their children's inner confidence and reveal the 5 building blocks of confidence. Maureen's work has also garnered praise and popularity on her Psychology Today and PBS blogs, as well as appeared across all media outlets such as Sirius XM's Martha Stewart Living Radio and CW's San Diego Living Morning Show. What's unique about Maureen is her global mindset. In 2007, she lived at the base of the Himalayas, working with Tibetan refugee children and also studying with His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. Since then, Maureen has spoken about spirituality in children across denominations and spiritual centres in the US and Europe. Creative Visions Foundation and the Simha Foundation have both recognised her outstanding work. And into September 2013, Maureen's new book, The Energetic Keys.
Helping people understand who these kids are and how to help them. Because when these kids aren't assisted, their energy is so fast moving, it can go in a really skillful way or really not skillful. So they're prone to depression and anxiety and other things that have brought them into my office, which is why I said, okay, wait, I need to do something more here. But back to your question about when they were born. Anyone who says they absolutely know, we can't know for sure, but certainly they are coming in more quantity now, and they probably started around earlier last century. So people say there was an influx in the 70s as well, but I know people who are, 55, 60, 70 years old that have a lot of indigo energy. So there's certainly no definitive sort of line in the sand, but these kids today, especially like ADHD, which we would call, attention dialed to a higher dimension, their mind works very differently. Their energetic and nervous system work very differently. So when we don't understand them, we sort of diagnose them and put them into categories.
Wow, for sure. The funny thing is that dyslexia, ADHD, ADD, it's all on the rise, bipolar. Right. I do think perhaps maybe there's a reason with our sons giving off a lot of